I filed for divorce after catching my wife with another man, in the back of my own car. A year later, she knocked on my door, holding a baby she claimed was mine. But that wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a whole new nightmare. It was a quiet Wednesday morning in late October when my life took a turn I never saw coming. I had woken up at 5:30 a.m., just like I always did, the gentle buzz of my phone alarm nudging me from sleep. Gabriella, my wife, was still asleep beside me, her chest rising and falling steadily. Her dark brown hair framed her peaceful face in a way that once made my heart skip. That morning, though, I just looked at her for a moment before quietly slipping out of bed. After a quick shower, I got dressed in the navy blue suit I had prepared the night before. I moved through the house on autopilot, my mind already shifting toward the business trip ahead. I had a quick flight to Denver for a 2-day real estate symposium, something I'd been prepping for over the past month. I grabbed my briefcase from the hallway table and headed downstairs. Mickey, our driver, was already waiting in the driveway, leaning against the hood of the black SUV. He wore his usual smug expression, one that I'd always dismissed as confidence. He gave me a half-hearted wave as I approached, but I barely acknowledged him. I was preoccupied, mentally rehearsing my presentation slides. Gabriella came down a few minutes later. She kissed me goodbye, her lips brushing against my cheek more out of habit than affection. I didn't dwell on it. Things between us had been strained lately, but I had chalked it up to work stress. We both had demanding careers, she in marketing, me in commercial real estate. That sort of tension came with the territory, or so I told myself. The ride to the airport was unremarkable. Mickey asked about the trip, and I gave him brief answers. My mind was elsewhere. I didn't notice the way he looked at me through the rearview mirror, or how comfortable he seemed behind the wheel of my car, parked in front of my house, wearing that same smug grin. I didn't think twice. By 8:15, I was through security and sipping burnt airport coffee at gate 12. And that's when I got the email. Symposium cancelled, venue issue. At first, I was irritated. Weeks of preparation, and now this? But the irritation faded quickly into a kind of quiet excitement. Maybe it was fate. Maybe I could surprise Gabriella with dinner. A spontaneous gesture, something to cut through the monotony. I dialed Mickey. No answer. I called again. Still nothing. That was strange. He was usually prompt. I assumed he was running errands or caught up in traffic, so I flagged down a cab and made my way back home. As we pulled onto my street, something gnawed at the back of my mind. Gabriella's car wasn't in the driveway, and neither was the SUV. Odd. But not enough to raise alarm. Maybe they had gone grocery shopping or out for coffee. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. Silence. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that feels unnatural. I called out her name, but the only reply was the hum of the refrigerator. I checked my phone, no texts, no missed calls. I paced the living room, then the kitchen. That sense of unease grew stronger. I stepped outside again, this time circling the block. A faint engine sound caught my attention. I followed it. A few houses down, tucked into a narrow alley behind our street, I saw it, my SUV, parked awkwardly. As I approached, I noticed something else. The car was moving, gently rocking, the way it does when someone's shifting their weight inside. For a second I froze. My mind refused to register what was happening. But as I got closer, reality set in. Through the tinted glass, I saw them. 2 figures entangled in the back seat. Her hand against the window. His face half-shadowed but unmistakable. Gabriella. And Mickey. I stood there motionless, the blood draining from my face, my breath caught somewhere between rage and disbelief. The driver I had trusted, the woman I had built a life with. Right there, in my own vehicle. The moment was surreal. Like I was watching someone else's tragedy unfold. But it was mine. I had never known betrayal like that, never imagined I'd be cast in this role. I didn't confront them. Not then. I walked away. My steps were slow, deliberate, my hands clenched into fists. I didn't know what I'd say, what I'd do. But one thing was certain: everything had changed. Irrevocably. I returned home, sat on the edge of the couch, and stared at the floor. The weight of it all pressing against my chest like a boulder. The trust I'd given so freely, shattered in a single morning. And so began the unraveling. The hours following that moment in the alley unfolded like a slow-burning nightmare. I stayed in the house, staring at the walls, the ticking of the clock echoing louder than it should have. Time seemed distorted, minutes dragging into hours, hours into lifeless voids. My mind replayed the image again and again: Gabriella, her body wrapped around Mickey in the back of my own car. It was the kind of betrayal that didn't just crack trust, it obliterated it. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't cry either. There was only silence inside me, like something vital had been hollowed out. The next morning, I woke up still dressed in yesterday's suit, my tie loosened, my shirt wrinkled, and my fists clenched in restless fury. I knew what I had to do, even if I didn't yet know how to live after it. She came back around 9. I heard the SUV in the driveway and her soft footsteps on the porch. When the door opened, I didn't look up. Gabriella walked in like nothing had happened. Maybe she assumed I was still in Denver. Maybe she thought she had time to hide the evidence, time to lie. She called my name, her voice tentative. I turned slowly to face her. For a second, her expression faltered, eyes wide, lips parted in a gasp. I didn't speak. Just stared. The silence between us was heavier than anything words could carry. She began to speak, stammering excuses I didn't want to hear. I stood, walked past her without a word, and headed upstairs. The marriage was over. There was no need to scream, no need to explain. The act had spoken louder than any confession. I grabbed my suitcase and began to pack. I moved methodically, folding shirts, collecting essentials. Gabriella followed me, pleading with every step. "Lyra, please. Let me explain," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. I said nothing. She reached for my arm, but I pulled away. Her touch made my skin crawl. The woman I once loved, now a stranger capable of slicing my heart open without remorse. Her betrayal hadn't been a mistake. It had been a choice. A series of them. As I zipped the bag shut, she dropped to her knees. "I messed up. I know. But we can fix this. Please, I'll do anything." I looked down at her, her mascara streaking down her cheeks, her hands trembling. There was no satisfaction in seeing her break. Just emptiness. Whatever we'd had, it was gone. Buried beneath the lies. "I want a divorce," I said finally. The words came out low, even final. She wailed, begged, clung to the hem of my jacket as I walked down the stairs. I didn't turn back. My taxi was already waiting. I stepped outside, leaving her behind, collapsed on the floor like a discarded memory. The ride to the hotel felt like a silent scream. Every passing streetlight flickered like a flashbulb against my thoughts. I checked into a small inn on the far side of the city, no frills, just a bed and 4 walls. That night, I lay awake again, staring at the ceiling, wondering how long I had been blind. The next days blurred together. I filed for divorce, blocked her number, and instructed my lawyer to handle any communication. Gabriella tried to reach me, emails, voicemails, even a letter left at my workplace. I ignored them all. There was nothing left to salvage. Work became my refuge. I buried myself in contracts, meetings, schedules. Anything to keep my mind from drifting back to her. To them. I threw away the photos, donated her clothes, and had the locks changed at the house I once thought was our home. But late at night, the silence would creep in again. I'd sit with a drink in hand, the glow of the city outside my window, and feel the weight of it all pressing on my chest. Love didn't die in a moment, it bled out slowly, painfully. There was no dramatic closure. No satisfying end. Just a man, alone in a rented room, trying to rebuild a life from ashes. I wasn't seeking revenge or pity. I just wanted distance, miles and years between me and the pain she left behind. That was the beginning of my exile. The beginning of forgetting her name, her voice, her scent. The beginning of learning how to be alone and not be afraid of it. That was the beginning of me. A full year had passed since I had walked away from the ruins of my marriage. The days had blurred into months, each one bringing a little more distance from the storm Gabriella had unleashed on my life. I had found a rhythm again, a routine that didn't involve apologies, deceit, or lingering questions. I worked, I ate alone, I went home to silence. And that was enough. Or at least, I convinced myself it was. Then one evening in late September, everything shifted again. I was sitting in my apartment, small, sparse, but mine. The television was on, playing something I wasn't paying attention to. My thoughts had drifted, as they often did, to the past. To the way she used to say my name. To the lies behind her smile. I had almost started to feel peace again. And then my phone lit up. The name on the screen stopped my heart for a second, Gabriella. I hadn't seen it in months. I stared at the glowing letters as if they'd somehow burned through the screen. Part of me wanted to block her all over again. Another part, a quieter, crueler part, wanted to see what new excuse she had to offer. The message was short: we need to talk. It's important. I didn't reply right away. I let the message sit, its presence simmering in the corner of my mind. Eventually, curiosity won out. I wrote back with one word: why? Her response came almost instantly: because of the child. I sat upright, my chest tightening. What child? I wrote back. Our child, she responded. His name is Jason. He's 4 months old. I dropped the phone. It clattered against the hardwood floor. My mind was racing, trying to find logic in the chaos. We hadn't seen each other in over a year. I remembered clearly how long it had been. How could she possibly claim the child was mine? I called her. My voice was sharp, stripped of softness. What are you talking about? I demanded. Gabriella's voice trembled on the other end. She told me she had found out she was pregnant after we separated. That she hadn't been with anyone else. That Jason had to be mine. I didn't believe her. I couldn't. After everything she had done, after betraying me with Mickey, lying to my face, I refused to take her word for anything. But something about her voice held a weight I hadn't heard before. She wasn't angry or manipulative. She sounded desperate. Tired. Like someone unraveling at the edges. We agreed to meet at a cafe downtown. One we used to visit in better times. I arrived early, sitting at a corner table with my back to the wall, watching the entrance. When she walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. Gabriella looked worn, older than I remembered. She held a bundled infant in her arms, a boy swaddled in a faded blue blanket. She sat down across from me, her hands shaking slightly. "This is Jason," she said. I looked at the baby. He was asleep, his tiny face peaceful. But I felt nothing. No connection. No spark of recognition. Just the cold steel of suspicion. I asked her directly if she was certain I was the father. She nodded, tears in her eyes. "I haven't been with anyone else. I swear it." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply told her we would need a DNA test. No discussion. No emotion. Just facts. She agreed. Said she would do whatever it took. That she didn't want anything from me, just the truth. The next few days passed in a haze. I went to work, answered emails, smiled through meetings. But in the back of my mind, the question haunted me. What if she was telling the truth? What if, after all the lies, this one thing was real? The call came late on a Wednesday. I stepped into the hallway, away from my desk, and answered with a hesitant breath. The voice on the other end was clinical. "The paternity test is negative." For a moment, everything stood still. I leaned against the wall, the breath escaping my lungs in a slow exhale. Relief, thick and overwhelming, settled in my chest. Then the anger followed. She had lied again. Or worse, she hadn't even known the truth and had tried to drag me into her spiral anyway. I dialed her number with shaking hands. When she answered, I didn't scream. My voice was low and calm, edged with finality. "He's not mine!" Gabriella's sobs filled the line. She claimed she didn't know. That she had hoped. That she was scared and alone. That she just wanted Jason to have a father. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. This wasn't about a child. This was about her desperation, her manipulations, her refusal to let go. I ended the call and blocked her again. That night, I sat in the dark, watching the lights of the city blink through my window. I should have felt closure. Instead, I felt tired. Just endlessly, deeply tired. She had tried to shackle me to her story one last time. But I had broken free again. Jason wasn't mine. And I was done. 2 days passed in silence. I had expected it to be over after the test. No more messages. No more false alarms. Gabriella would surely disappear for good. But on the third night, a knock echoed through my apartment just past 10 p.m. I wasn't expecting anyone. I approached the door with caution, heart already racing. There she was. Gabriella. Standing under the flickering hallway light, holding the child in her arms. Before I could speak, she whispered, "I need your help." I didn't invite her in. My voice was cold, stripped of sympathy. I reminded her that the test was conclusive. Jason was not my son. But she didn't budge. Her face was pale, exhausted, and she trembled with every breath. "I have nowhere else to go," she said. "I've lost everything." I told her it wasn't my concern. She made her choices. She was the one who walked out of the fire she started. But then she did something I didn't anticipate. She set the baby carrier down at my doorstep. Jason was asleep, unaware of the chaos surrounding him. Gabriella stepped back, eyes full of something I couldn't name. "I can't do this," she whispered. "I thought I could, but I can't. He's better off with you." Then she turned and ran down the steps, vanishing into the night. I was frozen in place. I called after her, but she didn't stop. Just like that, she was gone. And Jason, the child who wasn't even mine, was now my responsibility, at least for the moment. I brought him inside because I couldn't leave him out there. He didn't ask for this. I set the carrier down on the kitchen counter and stared at it, waiting to wake up from what felt like a twisted dream. When it became clear she wasn't coming back, I dialed 911. My voice shook as I explained everything. The dispatcher was calm, assuring me help was on the way. Police arrived within minutes. They asked questions, took statements. One officer checked on Jason, while another jotted down every word I said. I told them about the paternity test, about Gabriella's breakdown, about how she abandoned her child without warning. Child Protective Services came shortly after. A social worker, young but focused, took Jason into custody. She wrapped him gently in a blanket, whispering reassurances. Then they were gone, and I was left alone again, the apartment more silent than ever. For the next 2 days, I tried to return to normal. I buried myself in work, avoided unnecessary conversations, and skipped social media. But even as I worked late into the night, I couldn't shake the image of Jason's tiny face, peaceful, trusting, unaware. Then came the second call. The police had found Gabriella. She had been staying in a rundown motel on the outskirts of the city. Alone. Broke. Barely coherent. She was taken into custody without resistance. When I heard the news, I felt no satisfaction, just confirmation. Her downward spiral had finally hit rock bottom. She was charged with child abandonment. The officer on the phone said she could be facing serious jail time. And then, another surprise. A caseworker from CPS contacted me. They had performed a second DNA test, protocol, they said. The result was the same. Jason wasn't mine. But now they were looking for a permanent placement. Since Gabriella had left him with me, they offered the opportunity to take him in. It wasn't a demand. It was a choice. I didn't answer immediately. I said I needed time to think. That night, I sat on the floor, surrounded by silence and memories. My life had unraveled and reshaped so many times since Gabriella's betrayal. I had closed so many doors, but this one, it hung open just a little. Jason wasn't mine. But he was innocent. Left behind like something disposable. Part of me wanted to help. To be better than the people who broke him into the world. But I also knew what that would mean. Responsibility. Permanence. Emotion. I stared out the window, watching headlights move down the street like stars falling in reverse. Was I ready to carry someone else's burden? Or had I already been carrying mine for too long to even notice the difference? The decision haunted me for days. I paced my apartment, replaying every moment, every call, every look on that child's face. Jason wasn't mine, not by blood, not by any bond forged through love or choice. But for one terrifying, brief stretch of time, he had been mine in circumstance. And that left a mark. CPS called again. They needed an answer. The foster system had found a temporary home for Jason, but it wasn't permanent. They reminded me, gently, that his mother was facing trial. That the child would likely bounce from one home to another unless someone stepped in. I declined. Not because I didn't care. Not because I lacked empathy. But because I had spent too long buried under someone else's chaos. Gabriella's destruction had almost taken me with it. I had barely clawed my way out, and I wasn't ready to lose myself again trying to fix what I never broke. The caseworker thanked me for my honesty. I hung up and stood by the window, watching fall leaves drift down the sidewalk like burnt feathers. Weeks passed. Gabriella's trial came and went. I didn't attend. There was no need. The outcome was already written. She was sentenced to 5 years for child abandonment and fraud. I read about it online. A photo of her in the courtroom, face blank, eyes lost. There was no victory in it. No relief. Just an ending. I never responded to the letters her lawyer sent. I didn't return calls from the prison. Gabriella had used up every piece of me she could reach. There was nothing left to give. Jason, I heard later, had been placed with a couple in a quiet suburb outside the city. I received a brief message from the caseworker, a courtesy. He was doing well. Safe. Healthy. Loved. That was enough. More than he might have had otherwise. I didn't ask for updates after that. Seasons changed. Winter bled into spring. I moved to a smaller apartment on the east side, closer to work. I repainted the walls, bought new furniture, let go of things that reminded me of her. I built a life out of what remained. Simple. Solitary. Peaceful. Some nights, I'd sit on the porch and watch the lights of the city blink in the distance. I'd think of how fast everything had fallen apart. How close I came to being pulled under. But then I'd breathe in the silence around me, the absence of shouting, of chaos, of lies, and I'd feel grounded again. Gabriella's name faded from conversations. From thought. She became a cautionary memory, nothing more. And Jason, he became a quiet echo. Not of pain, but of choice. A reminder that walking away can be an act of mercy too. I had spent so long trying to rebuild. Trying to reclaim a sense of control after so much betrayal. And now, at last, the dust had settled. There was no grand moment of triumph. No parade. Just a man standing alone in the stillness of his own life, finally free. And sometimes, that's more than enough.